Hello and welcome to Taiwan Talks. I'm Ian Kavat. The Financial Times has reported that SEAL Team 6, the US Special Force that killed Osama bin Laden, has been training for over a year to assist Taiwan in the case of a Chinese invasion. The report comes as China hosted its Shangsan Security Forum, bringing together military officials from over 100 countries, including the US and the EU. As Beijing seeks a leading role in global security, we ask whether the reality matches up and what factors may stand in Beijing's way. Joining us to discuss this are Takuya Matsuda, National Taiwan University Department of Political Science Taiwan Fellow, and Guermantes Lailari, Institute for National Defense and Security Research Visiting Scholar with expertise in unconventional warfare. A very warm welcome to both on the show today. So let me come to you, Guermantes, first. SEAL Team 6 is one of the elite forces within the US military. What sets it apart from the other special forces?
There's a graphic we can show how it's structured, but each of the services have their own special forces unit, and each of those units have different levels of expertise and focus areas. So SEAL Team 6, or let's say what is often called Delta, these are all what they call Tier 1 units that have more direct action type missions. And so the Air Force has its own as well, the Marines, and so forth.
Okay, and so how were they used in the attack on Osama bin Laden? What were the special skills used there? Those
skills were infiltration and exfiltration. That's the getting in and getting out. Also, when they got on the ground, they had to deal with a lot of different scenarios where they didn't know who was going to be there. They had to basically open doors and find out if there was somebody there that had a gun or not. And so this is kind of like what they call a kill or capture mission, where they have a mission to, let's say, kill or capture bin Laden. And in this case, a lot of people were armed, and they had to kill him. Right. Professor Matsuda, why do you think such news was released or leaked at this moment?
Navy SEALs are a small unit that focuses on clandestine operations. I think the main reason this was, made to public knowledge is the fact that, it actually assures the Taiwanese people, right? The show of force is the most effective way to show commitment and reassure the public. So I think this is one of the reasons that, this was released at this moment right before the U.S. presidential elections coming up this November. Right. Okay. So, Guermantes, do you agree with that? The audience was actually a Taiwanese audience. How about the Chinese audience?
Well, I think it's always good to remind countries in the world that don't like America or America's allies that we are practicing to deal with any kind of scenario that China might throw at Taiwan. And in the case of special forces train for these missions all the time. There are 70,000 special forces personnel in the U.S. Special Forces Command. So that's a lot of people. So their focus is like, in the case of SEAL Team or Delta, they're like a gun. A gun can be used defensively or offensively. And so it's good, I think, for Taiwan to hear that there are U.S. forces around that could provide a defense in case China does an offense.
Right, and interesting that you brought up that point, because there is some media out there that's making a deal out of the fact that, the special operations or SEAL Team 6 are offensive, and that the US's role is to help defend Taiwan if their president orders them to do so. What do you say to that?
Well, like I mentioned, a gun is both defensive and offensive. So these special forces can be used to protect and to defend, and in cases where they're being attacked, they can be offensive.
There was a previous report that ended up being fake news. That was a report that US Green Berets were training Taiwanese troops. How would you say that this report is different to that report, and assuming that we do find this report more credible?
The Green Berets were reportedly in Kinmen and Matsu and Penghu. And then the SEALs were reportedly training around in Virginia to deal with a Taiwan Strait contingency. But I think the important thing here is that the U.S. has always been sending forces here to train, whether it's small numbers or large numbers. And according to U.S. law, the National Defense Authorization Act, they are here, and Taiwan's sending people to the U.S. and not just training Army, they're training all forces, including special forces.
Yeah, and so I guess the difference, Professor Matsuda, was that the March report was about a permanent force of Green Berets. Is that your understanding?
Right. So I think they wanted to backtrack that impression. I mean, it's really hard to verify if that, the U.S. forces were actually here in Taiwan, whether they were training, because these are very highly classified information. But I think the fact that they backtracked and also, and the fact that they made this more publicly available at this time shows that the U.S. wants to show them, convey the message that the U.S. is here to reassure the Taiwanese public.
Guermantes, the United States says, as we know, that China is the pacing threat, and that Taiwan, therefore, is the pacing scenario. This is from a former a National Security Council person that I spoke to. And he said that every part of the US military is training for a Taiwan contingency. That repeats essentially what you said. Is there any significance, you think, in the SEALs starting that training over a year ago? So we're talking about possibly mid-2023 or possibly, in the first half of 2023.
Well, the Taiwan has been a topic for a long period of time, so I'm not so sure that there's anything new to the report, because the U.S. and Taiwan have always had good relations, and the military, the U.S. military, let's put it this way, all special forces continuously train for their mission.
Going back to the TRA, which is the Taiwan Relations Act, under that, I believe, is it correct that the U.S. military has to maintain the capability to defend Taiwan?
That's 100% correct.
Professor Matsuda, let's go back to looking at some of the possible scenarios. And we heard what Guermantes said about sort of a direct attack. Are there any scenarios that you can think of where these SEAL Team 6 could be training for in terms of a Taiwan scenario contingency?
Right. So I think the fact that the SEALs are focused on clandestine operations demonstrates the fact that I think there's a realization in the United States that a gray zone situation that is not a full-scale military conflict, for example, like a seizure of the offshore islands like Kinmen and Matsu, or a quarantine situation, that these situations could be a likely scenario that deserve attention.
Guermantes, drilling down a little bit, do you think this could be connected to a TSMC scenario?
Look, the special forces can both take care of people who need to get out.
So hostage recovery?
You're right, they could do that, or they could also, help remove commanders who are opposing us. So there's lots of different things that the special forces can do. Not only the SEAL teams, but the Army, the Air Force. I would break it up into three different quick categories: prior to hostilities, during hostilities, and after hostilities. And in each one of those things, there are lots of things that the special forces could do. For example, they can train the military here on special forces. They can help the Taiwanese military with psychological warfare, which in the U.S. is now called military information support operations. We do know that the security force brigade is supporting Taiwan in terms of training their army. So all these things count. Now, another thing that the special forces could do is, for example, train the military here in case there is an occupation by the PLA for insurgency, to counter the PLA. So there's a whole spectrum of things that they can cover.
Right, so certainly not a limited role,
No.
as some analysts are saying. Professor Matsuda, let's go to, you mentioned about the Chinese audience. Do you think that China would be surprised at this report? You know, given that, as we know, every part of its own military is training for a Taiwan contingency.
The fact that the U.S., there are some small U.S. presence on Taiwan was somewhat public knowledge. I think they're not that surprised, but it is actually also, for China, U.S. intervention in a Taiwan scenario is one thing that they really want to voice.
We're talking about the U.S. military training for a possible contingency. So the CIA says that Xi Jinping set his military a goal to be able to take Taiwan by 2027. Now, in the meeting between Joe Biden and Xi Jinping in San Francisco in 2023, apparently Xi Jinping sounded very irritated at this year being bandied about. And later, when he met with Ursula von der Leyen in June 2024, he said that the US is actually baiting China into war. So can we see it from a different perspective? Can we see it that China is just doing what all militaries do, which is, as you've also said about the US military, simply training to fight with the opponent. It's simply increasing its capabilities in order to do that, and that it's also developing this approach of peace through strength.
Well, I don't think that anyone who's rational would say that China's actions around Taiwan are peaceful. Encroaching within 24 nautical miles, dozens of ships, aircraft, flying close, harassing the Philippine Navy, harassing the Japanese. These are not things that countries do to prepare their military forces. This is an example of aggression by a superpower against smaller countries. So I don't buy the peace through strength argument regarding China and their attempt to try to make it sound like they're just preparing like anybody else doesn't make sense to me.
Let's pick up on an example. So, Professor Matsuda, just recently, Beijing sent its Liaoning aircraft carrier into the contiguous zone of Japan around the Yonaguni Island, which is the closest island to Taiwan. How do you see that as a Japanese? How do you see that? We've already seen that there's been aircraft flying into Japanese airspace the first time since World War II, and also very regular incursions into Japanese territorial waters, which is within 12 nautical miles of its coast.
The Russians and the Chinese actually were transiting through the Miyako Strait, like just actually last summer. However, the fact that this aircraft carrier transits through these waters between Iriomote and Yonaguni, which is actually within the Satsuma Islands, this is very provocative because and also this shows that the Chinese actually realize that these islands could be strategically important. There's a lot of realization in the U.S. that these islands could really, be a strategic asset to change the military balance over Taiwan. And I think this incursion into these waters actually show that China is taking note on that, and they're just manifesting that towards Japan and the United States.
And Guermantes, you wanted to reply?
Yeah. So, I'm a researcher, and one of the things that I like to research is what China thinks is its territory. And last year they came out with a map that added a 10th dashed line, which came right up close to Taiwan. But one of the things I found was a map by a Chinese tourist agency, and they show a map of also the 10 dash line, but they also show the water above Taiwan, which is quite large. They are saying it's Chinese territory,
right.
Territorial waters.
What's the date of that map?
It's this year. It's this year. It's not an official map by the PRC government, but it's a tourist map by a company in China showing what China's territory is.
So it basically claims Okinawa.
It basically claims all the waters between Taiwan and Okinawa. Yeah, so I suspect that maybe this year or next year they're going to have an 11th dash line and a 12th dash line that keeps on going up and around to Korea. So I think that their actions reflect this map. They think that those waters that they're crossing into are their their territorial waters.
Right. Yes, I think this is they're being increasingly vocal about that claim. Now, Guermantes, the U.S. is amassing anti-ship weapons. It's described as gathering an affordable mass, and this is to deter China. So, tell us more about Quick Sync and why the U.S. thinks that this will be effective.
Quick Sync is an experimental weapon design for dumb bombs. In this case, it's a 2,000-pound bomb that got smart, like a JDAM. And the difference is that a JDAM just basically falls down and gets the target very accurately. This one glides to the target. And so what this does is it makes, the U.S. has lots of dumb bombs, and they can produce quite a lot of them. So what this does, it makes it a smart bomb. And so it can maneuver to a location that puts it right on target to a ship. And so what they've done is they did an experiment where they had a large frigate, a U.S. frigate, old frigate, Perry class, and they dropped the bomb, and it glided perfectly to the ship, and it broke it in half.
Right. Now, China, of course, would say this sort of thing and this sort of news is provocative, that it's starting or contributing to an arms race. But what's what's your view of that?
Look, both sides are developing weapons, and it's natural. It's part of the process that militaries do. And the difference is that the U.S. publicizes a lot of its weapons tests, and China doesn't. They hide a lot of stuff. And so,
do you think it's leveling the play?
Well, yeah, I mean, China has developed a huge armada of drones in the air, on the sea, under the sea. And so Taiwan and the U.S. are trying to deal with this challenge of thousands of drones coming at Taiwan. And so what this does is it would destroy the Navy of China, the PLA Navy, and would prevent them from conducting perhaps a blockade or an invasion.
Okay, and let's go to Shangsan. On the sidelines of Beijing's three-day Shangsan Security Forum, Lieutenant General He Lei, a senior military official, said China will crush any foreign incursion into its sovereign territory in the South China Sea. He said, "We hope the South China Sea will remain a sea of peace." But he added, if the US moves its pawns behind the scenes, if it pushes countries to the front line, or if the US itself ends up on the front line, then we will never have any patience. We will resolutely crush any foreign hostile encroachment. Professor Matsuda, do you think this comment was aimed at potential of US escorts of Philippine resupply ships?
Right. I think this is basically targeting the U.S.-Philippine alliance itself. Over the summer, we saw, the Chinese basically harassing, actually, basically attacking the Philippine Coast Guards. And, the U.S.-Philippine alliance is actually, underappreciated, but it's very critical in a Taiwan scenario. And China knows that, so they want to. They also, another important factor is that the United States has not fully been able to defend the Filipinos in the South China Sea in the past decade, and by making these comments and by discouraging the United States from intervening in the South China Sea, they're trying to drive a wedge between the U.S. and the Philippines, which actually will, because given the fact that the Filipinos will be very critical, important in a Taiwan scenario. So this is basically their tactics to drive a wedge between Manila and Washington. Right.
The role of the Philippines in a Taiwan scenario. Guermantes, if you could comment on, the foreign encroachment and also this idea of trying to paint the Philippines as a pawn.
Well, first, I'd like to point out that the Philippines didn't send a representative to the forum, which says a lot. And it's obviously a slap in the face of China because of what China's doing to the Philippines as a nation. And the people of the Philippines also feel the pressure because China has denied them the fishing rights around their territory. But to answer your question, I think it's important that we recognize that the territory that China claims has been decided that it's not theirs.
Right, the 2016 arbitral ruling?
Right. And so the Philippine government and the rest of the world knows what's going on. I mean, the great thing about the Philippines is that they've shown these great photographs of and camera video of the harassment that the Chinese Coast Guard has been doing to their ships.
Okay, so on that note, in his speech at the forum, Chinese Defense Minister Dong Jun said major countries must take the lead in safeguarding global security, abandon a zero-sum mindset and refrain from bullying the small and the weak. He said regional countries should seek strength through unity and rely on themselves for their own peace. However, his speech did not directly mention Taiwan. So, Professor Matsuda, the message of Dong's speech was China as a peacemaker. Indeed, the theme of the forum was working together toward peace and a shared future. Do you think he succeeded in linking China to peace?
Right. I think China has been trying to create this narrative, like over the past decade or so, that they are the right side of history and that they are the pacemaker and they are the defenders of the international order. However, as you can see, like, looking at the film, the South China Sea and overall in this region, you can see how, we are all, and also the world, like even also Europe, is also taking note that China is actually aggressor here. And I think at this point, it's very hard for other countries to buy China's argument that they're a peacemaker. It's been abundantly clear that they are basically not fulfilling what they're trying to convey.
So that's interesting, isn't it? Because we know that through holding Xiangshan, China wants to have this leading role in global security. What does the reality point to, though?
The reality is what they're saying is exactly the opposite of what's happening in the real world. It's ironic. It's so ironic that they are...
As we saw from the speech from Dong Jun.
Yes, he is saying things that sound nice, but in actuality, the PRC's military is doing the opposite. They're bullying the Philippines.
The small and the weak?
The small and the weak. They're doing all the things that they're saying that shouldn't be done. And so, everyone who heard his speech understands that this is all propaganda. I mean, beyond the military part, there's the cyber harassment that Taiwan gets and everybody else gets. There's the disinformation that's happening all over the world that they manipulate. So they're, in my opinion, they're at war with anybody that doesn't go along with them.
Professor Matsuda, this is interesting too, that he said the regional countries should seek strength through unity, but then he says, and rely on themselves for their own peace. It's obviously in their interests, in China's interest for each country to rely on its own, because after all, China is the greatest military power in the region.
Right. I think that, this statement basically shows that from China's, China doesn't want the United States in the region, and China wants to take the lead in building up its own security order in the region, and I think that, this basically shows that U.S. presence in the region is basically was something they don't want.
Right. And Guermantes, one of the Chinese academics, Wu Xinbo, Dean of the Institute of International Studies at Fudan University, he alleged that the US is using Taiwan as a bargaining chip, and he said it's to put checks and balances on China. He also claimed that Taiwan should shut the door to Taiwan independence to avoid catastrophe. I just wanted to ask you, what do you think he means by shutting the door to Taiwan independence?
Well, first, let's be clear. Everyone in the world that knows what's happening here realizes that Taiwan is already an independent country. All right. So even according to the Montevideo Convention, the 4 types of categories that a country is. But nevertheless, let's just say that what he's promoting is the propaganda that that Taiwan is part of China, and that if Taiwan doesn't comply, that China will annex Taiwan. So again, this is part of their propaganda to make people believe that Taiwan is not independent, and that it will make sure that anybody who contradicts that will get, let's say, the door slammed in their face.
Professor Matsuda, some of the analysis about the Xiangshan Forum said that China was deliberately softer this year. For instance, we mentioned that there wasn't a direct mention of Taiwan. Do you agree with that analysis, firstly? And if you do, what do you think the reasons are?
Right. I think it's really hard to say that we're actually softer this year because as we see this year, like with summer we had the South China Sea, how they're bullying the Filipinos. But I think it's really hard to say they were softer. However, we can also say that they are being more cautious in some grounds, right? For example, after Kinmen fisherman incident, we had somewhat of a resolution there as well, and also. There's been back channel between Wang Yi and Jake Sullivan the past year or so. And what this means is that, also from China's perspective, a war in the region is catastrophic. They don't want a war here. So they also have the realization that they want to avoid, misperceptions or unwarranted escalation here in this region. And they, at least, but at this point, it's not that the United States and China is in agreement or have a consensus, but we can probably say that there are attempts to clarify each other's positions and at least compare notes. So in order to avoid an unwanted or inadvertent war in the region.
We're going to have to end it there. Thank you so much for joining the show today, Takuya Matsuda and Guermantes Lailari. If you liked our show, please search for us on YouTube, give us a thumbs up and hit subscribe to our channel. Thank you for watching the show today. Stay safe and see you next time.
At Connected, we believe in the power of dialogue. It's not just about the headlines, it's about finding common ground. Join the conversation.
Connected with Divya Gopalan on Taiwan Plus.